Special guest joining us live from our office in D.C. this morning. We have Alexandria Ocasio Cortez.
Ooh.
What's happening? How are you?
I'm good. How are you? How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for the program. Good considering, right? Like there's
Yeah.
a lot of emotion
Right.
and a lot of chaos, and there's a lot of negative energy being spewed right now. You've been on our program. I want to say it was 5 years ago. We were talking about the occupation of Gaza and how Palestinians were being treated by the government of Israel, and just having a real honest conversation. Which, at the time, I got into it with some of my Jewish friends about our conversation. Because they don't, there was a energy of people not being honest about what the Israeli government was doing and how the humanitarian crisis that the Palestinians were living through was being handled. Fast forward to this moment in time, and now it is turned into, one of the saddest situations we've seen in recent history. You had an amazing post, Rosenberg. You reached out. You saw her post.
Well, yeah, basically AOC was doing what we've been trying to do on this show, and you just did it very eloquently, as always, about basically condemning the protest in Times Square, which sort of looked like a celebration of Hamas in some way. And you basically said, this is craziness and disgusting. You're able to condemn terrorism while also having a conversation about what the state of things has been for Palestinians in Israel for a long time. Would you say that's the right way of putting it?
Yeah, I think so. I would say that's pretty spot on.
Why is it so? I mean, I guess I know myself also, but for you, what makes it so challenging to talk about this issue?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we're talking about intergenerational trauma that goes for generations for Israelis, for our Jewish community, for Palestinians, for our Muslim community, and so many others. And so whenever a traumatic event happens, we are not just experiencing that traumatic event, we are experiencing almost every traumatic event leading up to that traumatic event as well at the same time. And so that is going to create an environment that is volatile, reactive, and actively dangerous. Because the hardest part, I think, my assessment, is that what you actually need in a time of so much devastation is to be able to de-escalate and to be able to make sure that we're really weighing the full weight of the violence and the decisions that are happening right now and leading up to that moment. So I think that's what makes it hard. It's also, we're talking about an international issue, but we're also managing our community here. New York, we have some of the highest populations of Jewish people and Muslims and diasporas affected, and how we navigate it here absolutely has effects in how things are navigated there.
Now, AOC, I in this moment, there's a lot, like you said, there's a lot of vitriol, there's a lot of anger coming from everywhere. And I think as an American citizen, our government, has supported Israel in their efforts to get rid of terrorism in Israel, which I think is a valiant effort. But in doing so, it has caused, the oppression of Palestinian people who are stuck in the Gaza Strip. So, and now we can be honest and say that it's been mismanaged, clearly, right? Like this is a clear mismanagement, and you're even hearing it from, Israel news publications that are coming out against Netanyahu. What is that conversation happening with you and your colleagues in D.C.?
Yeah, I think this is a conversation that, thanks to so much advocacy and organizing from just everyday people on the ground, Jewish communities, Muslim communities, Palestinian communities, Israeli communities, actively coming together, there's more of a conversation about this than there's ever been before. There is the necessity, as we've seen on Saturday, the necessity to cherish, center, value Jewish safety. And also, at the same time, we cannot allow that to be used as the guise for the oppression of Palestinians. And in fact, I would argue a lot of times, like, people try to approach this through a left-right lens as though justice is the opposite of national security or imperils security. But I actively believe from the bottom of my heart that injustice is makes us less safe.
That's right.
And patient, the occupation and the routine violation of Palestinian human rights creates a volatile environment, and it actively distracts us from the safety of our Israeli and Jewish community. For example, one of the weaknesses leading up to this event was that a lot of the IDF was moved from some of the most sensitive and important places to guard, and there were resources devoted to protecting the West, a lot of the settlements, the illegal settlements in the West Bank, which left a lot of what's going on vulnerable. And so we need to have a conversation about that. And in moments like these, it almost feels like nuance and compassion is deemed the enemy on all ends of things.
Yeah.
You know, how many times one of the reasons I respect you all so much is that, you know, like you mentioned, you're not new to this conversation.
Right.
You're not new to this, you're true to this. And you asked about this, you know, you would bring this up when it wasn't in the news and say, what are we doing about this? And it's those conversations that lead to breakthroughs in this moment. We can do both. We can condemn anti-Semitism. We can condemn the occupation, because both of these things are about justice. And that's really what we need to be centered about, and not enable the language that we're hearing from people like Lindsey Graham and others, trying to almost ramp up for what is potentially an ethnic cleansing.
I don't know how you are a mature adult in this world and you think that more violence
It's going to be the
against a
solution.
particular group is going to somehow solve where we are
Or make you safer.
That's
what I always
don't
try
even
to.
understand.
I kind of try to appeal to people now. Like, okay, for most people, let's be real, guys. Their priority is the safety of their people.
That's right.
That's just most people. I can honestly say the people in this conversation are all people who care about groups that we're not a part of. Most people, though, really care about their own group. So my way of trying to relate to people is to say, for the protection of your own group, de-escalation is the key. We're not going to be safer. Israel's not going to be safer because violence persists over and over again.
That's right.
I mean, it sounds like so basic and cliched, like kind of like eye for an eye, like the most simple things that are actually true.
Yeah, and I think yesterday, just being that we all consume, right, our information from the internet, from social media, I came across a couple of threads, like really tackling all the misinformation that's going on. And we are living in a Black Mirror episode where people are using this disinformation to just poke emotionally and rile up. And I have seen some people that I'm like, yo, the hate and like you said, and the amount of just Islamophobic anti-Semitism that I've seen over and over and over again is insanity.
And AOC, I'm curious to ask you this. So one of the things that you've been dealing with since you got into office is people believing that the new progressive is anti-Israel, is anti-Semitic. And on social media, I'm going to be real with you, and I'm sure you've seen the same thing. Whether it's fake, whether it's bots, whether it's actual real thing, you do see a lot of it. Like, it's almost a caricature of the progressives that, like, Saturday happened, and while Jewish people like myself are heartbroken and my Israeli wife is scared for her family, it's like the so-called progressives online are immediately bashing Israel to a degree that was so uncool and just unempathetic, unkind. Do you feel sort of the need to show people that that is not really the nature of a progressive, like at least an Alexandria Ocasio Cortez?
We can, yes. I mean, we can do both, right? To me, what is central about progressivism, to me, what is central too about democratic socialism, anti-capitalism, you name it, solidarity, is the central valuing of human dignity and human life on a universal and unconditional basis. And I think two things can be true at the same time. And this is part of one of the traumas that have been that are triggered, right? Is that anybody for decades, you know this, I know this, anybody who would even say the word Palestine, so often the charge of anti-Semitism would be politically weaponized in cynical ways. That history is real and true, while also the fact that anti-Semitism is real and it is dangerous and must be checked. Authentic anti-Semitism must be checked wherever we see it. That is also true at the same time. And we can navigate those complexities. There are absolutely things that are absolutely true about the occupation, about Netanyahu's policies, about the decisions of the Israeli government. But at the end of the day, we are human beings, and tragedy requires space for grief, for everybody. Grief for Palestinians, grief for Israelis. And it is dehumanization that is the stepping stone to ethnic cleansing, to genocide, which we have seen from the Holocaust to Gaza. And that, I think, is the thing that is so important for us to focus on.
If you were to have a conversation with President Biden in the coming days and weeks, what would you be urging him to do? What should the role of the United States be right now?
I would say this. I would say that the United States, our responsibility is to the stability and the security of the region. That means being able to support, yes, Israel in its defensive capacities, right, in its ability in that context. But it also means that the United States has a responsibility to ensure accountability to human rights, to prevent the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, and to ensure that horrors do not happen in the names of victims who do not want their tragedy used to justify further violence and injustice.
Right.
Beautifully said.
I think we have to also make sure people understand that, Palestinians don't all live in Gaza.
Yes. Roughly
Right.
2 million live in Gaza.
Right.
There's
And so
another
there's-
3 million people in Palestine.
Right. You also need to articulate that many, many, many Palestinians are Christian. There's like a 20% population of Palestinians that are Christian. They're not even Muslim. So there's that part of it. Then you have to go in and make sure everybody, most Palestinians don't align with Hamas. Like, that's not a thing.
And then on the flip side of that coin, you have to recognize, while a lot of people voted for Netanyahu, currently when this happened, Israel has been in full protest every single week. Hundreds of thousands of people who are anti-Netanyahu and his policy. We also have to remember, it's on both sides. It's fundamentalist religious people who are sort of driving this
man.
issue.
Yes.
Like it's
Yes.
and it's done under the guise of, I don't want to diss real religious people because it's done under the guise of religion. But really, if you see what happened leading up to Saturday, it was this extreme right religious people in Israel trying to push the boundaries on these holy sites. And then you, of course, have Hamas, who's just waiting for the moment to
Well,
do
there
it
was-
under the guise
There
of
was-
religious
You
things.
said, Rosenberg, the other day that there was a purposeful prayer that took place at a Muslim religious site that they
It's a
knew-
shared religious site.
It's a shared religion, but they knew it was antagonizing
Correct.
the situation.
And Israeli police were allowing it to happen. And again, my guess is, AOC, this comes from the sort of a vibe that's been set by Netanyahu and his cronies since they got in December, where if you look around, experts on this subject knew this was going to be very dangerous because Netanyahu brought in really far right-wing extremist anti-Palestinian people to his cabinet.
Absolutely. And here's the thing too, is that extremism, that fundamentalism is always to the advantage of the people who are stoking it, right? Hamas, in a sick and twisted way, this violence assists in these larger radicalization efforts.
Of course.
Right? The biggest enemies to a lot of these established powers are young people who want peace. And so the way that you radicalize a population is to engage in and is to create instability.
That's right.
So that people have to retreat into their trenches and feel into the trenches.
And they get scared. They get scared into radicalism.
Yes. And one thing too, I want to add as well, Rosenberg, is that you are right about this religious fundamentalism, but it's not just Islamic. It's not just Jewish. It is also Christian.
That's right.
Because in the United States of America, Christian fundamentalism and nationalism, which has also been extremely anti-Semitic, has also aligned itself with some of the most right-wing and authoritarian and inflammatory powers in the region. And so it's not a coincidence that when Trump was in power, he moved the embassy to Jerusalem.
Oh, yeah.
And
Antagonizing people even more.
Exactly. And that is also rooted in Christian fundamentalism, because there is a ton of fundamentalist literature around revelations in the Bible that leads people to project incorrectly, by the way, the country that is Israel today is not the Israel of the Bible. The country that is Israel today was established in this century. And so this is driven by American. There are a lot of drivers from American Christian fundamentalism to Islamic fundamentalism with Hamas to a lot of the right-wing Israeli forces, where everybody benefits by stoking this in those power structures, from monetarily in our military defense complex, to just being able to. It's so easy to build political power out of fear. We saw this after 9/11, George Bush. We've seen it over and over and over again. And we're seeing it now in the weaponization and collective punishment of Palestinians in Gaza, which is a war crime. Right now, what we saw on Saturday is a horrific tragedy. And what we're seeing today is also a horrific tragedy that we can stop. We can stop this. We can stop and mobilize against the illegal blockades against food and water. Nearly half of the population of Gaza is children, kids under 15 years old, who had nothing to do with any of this, but will be traumatized by it.
And will be and potentially radicalized, which goes into making people unsafe.
And the cycle continues and continues. And
we have to stop the cycle. And the U.S. has power and agency in this moment to help stop that.
And an obligation.
An obligation.
I just also want to encourage my fellow Jewish folks out there who care deeply about Israel, who have friends and family there. The people especially who it's a real thing for. Not an issue, but a place that, in my home, all the pictures of me in my childhood are me at 5 years old standing in Jerusalem. That's a real part of our life. You are able to have love for that place and those people and the feeling. Israel's a fun, 100%. Wonderful place. You're able to have love for all those things and also recognize that what the government's been doing in Gaza is wrong, and also recognize that is not a justification for the terror attacks of Saturday.
That's right.
All of these thoughts are possible, but I ask everyone to question this. When you see people like Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and all these people get up and stand there and say, we must protect Israel, we must wipe out Palestine. Think about why they're saying that. Do you really think it's because they care about Jewish people and Jewish safety? Why? It doesn't align with anything else. So to AOC's whole point she was just making about Christian fundamentalism also, I know it's deep and complicated and hard for all of us to understand, but just question why these people who you wouldn't understand why they're defending Jews all of a sudden have such a vested interest supposedly in Israel.
100%. And that's the thing, is that, there's 2 points to this, right? There's the home point, and then there's the abroad point. At home, when we are in, this is unsafe in New York City, right? Jewish people are profoundly scared in our Jewish community. Rightfully so. A lot of what I saw over this weekend was horrific. And it's a big part of what compelled me to speak. I was appalled. And
You mean at what looked like people like almost supporting Hamas, you're saying?
yeah, and just
Celebrating death. They were celebrating death. They were celebrating mass murder. That's what they were doing.
And even if you just take a step, there's that element, which is the worst of it. But even if you just take a step back, it's just allowing space to grieve, and for all people to grieve, right? It's not about centering one humanity or another. It's just creating the space to grieve. But also, what keeps each other safe is when people are able to check their friends, when they're able to check the people that they are in community with, right? It's not like, sure, it's good to call out racism, xenophobia, bigotry on the other side of things. But it's actually when Jewish folks, Jewish allies are in community and checking Islamophobia, and whether it's Muslim or like certain like left circles or right circles or whatever, I personally believe that a lot of bigotry, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, misogyny, anti-Black racism, whatever it is, it's not as much along a spectrum. Obviously, it's more concentrated in some than others. But at the end of the day, these are cultural phenomena that exist everywhere. That's what structural racism is. And so, it's like what keeps us safe is checking it amongst our friends. And when Jewish folks are checking Islamophobia, which like JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York City, I often have a lot of policy disagreements with them, but they stood up against a lot of this Palestinian genocide rhetoric yesterday. And like, that is meaningful, right? When it's people that we agree with, that we check on some things, right? That you check, that's what keeps us safe. And it's the same thing abroad, right? It is when we realize that our personal safety is intertwined, inextricable in the safety of others, that we actually generate security, like actual safety. And it's so important for that to be recognized. I know, one of the questions that I get too is that when I talk about right now, Gaza is being indiscriminately bombed. Civilian centers are being targeted. Schools are being bombed. The only humanitarian exit into Egypt was bombed as well by the Israeli government. And these, what we are seeing right now is the buildup to an ongoing humanitarian crisis. And we have to be able to separate these two different events in order to really make sure that we're doing justice by everybody. And people will say like, well, we have to go after Hamas, and what is our other choice? And so for people who aren't even moved by the moral argument, I would ask those people, we have tried this so many times before, right? Like, how many times has there been an attack, a disproportionate response, and we're still here?
Correct.
Saturday still happened. And so this is pursuing a proven and failed strategy. We know this doesn't work. So why do it? Why kill kids? Why put people in danger? Why perpetuate these cycles when we've done it so many times and it's never kept us safe?
AOC.
Hey, AOC, happy birthday, by the way, on a different note.
Thank you so much.
Happy birthday.
We appreciate your energy this morning, and we appreciate your, always being brave, and sticking up for the oppressed and sticking up for what's right and being on the right side of history, regardless of all the critique and negative energy that comes your way. You continue to fight, and we appreciate you.
No, and I mean, same goes to you all. It's not easy to have these conversations on media. The fact that you all are able to do this on a radio airwave so big and so widely listened to by our city and the country and the world, it's a big deal just to be able to have this space. So I thank you.
AOC, take care of yourself. Have you guys got a speaker? Like, what are we doing? You guys still, the Republicans, have they found leadership yet? What are we doing?
Mike Lawler at Westchester, Mark Molinaro of New York. You got all these Republicans from New York, and they're a hot mess. How about this? Next year, Let's just send Democrats from New York there. And politics is a mess. I'm not here to say it's going to solve all our problems, but it's certainly going to help us with this one.
Well,
Good luck with all
over
that.
there.
I know.
Good luck over there. AOC, give it up one
Thank
time,
you.
man. Ebro in the
Thank
morning.
you. Thank
Laura
you so
Stiles,
much.
Rosenberg.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.